Greetings, my name is Tom Bogle. I'm the lead developer for Transcelerator, and today I'd like to explain what this program is and show how it can help speed up the work of a translation team. When a Bible translation has been drafted, it needs to be tested using native speakers of the language to make sure it sounds natural, makes sense, and communicates clearly in the intended message. This is where Transcelerator comes in. Transcelerator is a paratext plugin that helps to accelerate the work of a Bible translation team by partially automating the translation of comprehension checking questions. The premise is that as a user translates a few questions, it is possible to infer plausible translations or partial translations from many other similar questions or questions with parts that are similar. Mark Penny did the early pioneering on this. He noticed that the canned list of comprehension checking questions in Translator's workplace had a lot of questions that were exact duplicates for different scripture passages, were very similar, or contained phrases that were repeated in a lot of questions. He figured out that he could have the MTTs translate a few questions in commonly repeated phrases so they wouldn't have to translate every question from scratch. Furthermore, by taking advantage of his biblical terms database, he could get the computer to plug the correct proper names into the questions that had a common frame. For example, what did A say to B? When Mike Cochran visited him in South Asia, Mark showed him what he had come up with. They began to wonder if someone could take this concept and package it in a form that would make it accessible to teams that didn't have someone with the same technical know-how as Mark Penny. That's how I got involved. After picking Mark's brain via email and Skype, Tim Steenwyk and I put together a prototype, mostly using Spanish as our test language. Then my family and I went over for a couple of months to do some field testing and see what else was needed to have a complete solution. The original prototype was done inside Fieldworks Translation Editor, but in 2013 we developed a plugin architecture for paratext, and early in 2014 we publicly announced the first official release of Transcelerator as a paratext plugin. Paratext plugin architecture currently only works on Microsoft Windows, and thus far Transcelerator has only been developed for Windows. Transcelerator requires paratext 7.4 or later, but 7.5 has been released, so I'd recommend upgrading if you haven't already. The installer for Transcelerator requires administrator rights. Once it is installed, any authorized paratext user can use it. Transcelerator has minimal disk space requirements. The installed size is less than 15 megabytes. The size of data will vary by project, but if all factory supplied questions are translated for the whole Bible, it's unlikely to take more than a few megabytes. Likewise, the memory requirements will vary by project, but will probably not exceed a few hundred megabytes. Transcelerator is very processor intensive, so if you have a slower machine, expect it to be a little sluggish, especially during startup. If you've not done any work in paratext to establish a vernacular equivalence for the major biblical terms list, paratext will guess at the renderings using its statistical glossing feature. This will work fairly well, especially for proper names, but for best results, I would encourage you to work to analyze your use of these key biblical terms as much as possible. Not only will this probably help improve your translation, it will also enable you to get the maximum benefit from Transcelerator. After installing Transcelerator, restart paratext. When you start Transcelerator, it will load questions for the currently active project, so make sure that the active project is the scripture translation you want to work on. If you have properly associated your paratext project with the appropriate keyboard for entering vernacular text, the same keyboard will be activated when translating questions in Transcelerator. Start Transcelerator in paratext on the Tools menu. Click Transcelerator. By default, Transcelerator initially tries to display the list of questions sorted, so the questions at the top are the ones that will give you the most bang for your buck. If you start translating from the top down, you will probably find that you will quickly start to make pretty good progress with the help of Transcelerator's automated translation guessing logic. The longer and harder questions to translate will sort closer to the bottom of the list, but you can translate the questions in any order, and Transcelerator will do its best to learn as you work. So you can see here in the Spanish project that I'm working on, I've already translated a lot of the easy questions. By doing a control down arrow, I can go to the next question that has not been translated. What did God command to Abimelech? And because there's already been other questions that are similar to that, Transcelerator has filled in a guess, and its guess is correct. Que le mandó Dios a Abimelech. So I can just mark that as confirmed and go to the next untranslated question, which is also a similar question. Que le mandó Dios a Isaac is the correct translation for what did God command Isaac. So I will confirm that one and go to the next untranslated question. This one is, what was Jesus teaching the Pharisees? And the guess that Transcelerator has made is not grammatically correct, but it also has the wrong rendering for the key term teaching. And if we want to see why, we can open up that term in paratext and see what the term is and see why it used that term. The word is the Greek word that in Spanish is translated as tradición in Matthew 15:6, or in English the word's tradition. If you look at the English gloss here, we can see that it has both the sense of teaching or tradition. So whenever Transcelerator sees the word teaching in a question, it says, oh, that could be this key term. Well, as it turns out, that's not that key term, because here it's teaching the verb, not the noun. And so what we want to do here is actually translate this question using the correct Spanish word, and then we'll add it as a rendering for this term only in Transcelerator. It's not a rendering used in the New Testament, so we don't need to add it in paratext. But here we'll say, que enseñaba Jesús a los fariseos. What was teaching Jesus to the Pharisees? Okay, and then what we're going to do is mark that as correct, as confirmed, and we're going to select this word enseñaba. We're going to drag it down onto this key term teaching, and so now that term is available to be selected when we find another question that has teaching. We can go up in the filter here and type in teaching, and we'll see all the questions that have that, and some of them have already been translated. Here, this is enseñando, which is another conjugation of the same verb, and I'm going to drag that down and add that to the list as well. And in fact, that's probably the most likely word to use for that term, so I'm going to mark it as the default rendering. Now, if we wanted to, we could go in here and actually define a rule that says when the English question has the word teach in it, then the best choice to use in Spanish is enseñando. We could even make the rule say if it was teaching, it should be enseñando. If it's teach, it should be enseña, and so forth. I'm not going to set up that rule now, but those are the kinds of rules you can do. Generally speaking, these rules are more useful for things that are broader than just a single key term, but you can use this to help Transcelerator decide which of the many renderings for a term should be is most appropriate in a particular context. And you can see there I had several rules set up to help it choose for Spanish. So let's go to the next question here that needs translation. What was Jesus teaching with this parable? Okay, and this should be que estaba enseñando Jesús con esta parábola. So we're going to change era to estaba. And then we want to move this word around to the other side. So one way to do that, of course, would be to cut and paste, but you can also just do Alt-Shift arrow, and that will move the current word over in the direction of the arrow. So, que estaba enseñando Jesús con esta parábola? That's now correct. Let me just show you one other thing. This is an important part of Transcelerator, and that's the generation of the script at the end. Once you have translated all the questions that you plan to translate for a book, you need to produce a checking script that can be used to actually take out to a village context or be sent to somebody so they can try to answer the questions and see whether or not you've done a good job. So I'm going to do it for the book of Acts, and it tells me that there's some of the questions for the book of Acts that have not yet been translated, and so that's okay. This is just a demo. And there you can see the HTML document that's generated that has the questions here, and comments about them, and then allows the translator to administer these questions in a checking situation. And in some cases, you'll see there's also an answer, and it tells what verse number the answer is in. So that's a brief look at Transcelerator in action. One important caveat about Transcelerator, a few people have raised the legitimate concern that Transcelerator pushes teams in the direction of relying on a canned set of comprehension checking questions rather than doing the hard but valuable work of crafting questions that are likely to uncover confusion that might be specific to a particular culture or translation. To quote one such critic, based on many years of translation and consultant experience, pre-prepared lists of questions make me very nervous. Good test questions are highly language specific. I have seen questions that translators have prepared using the old Dallas list, and the result has not been good. I'm convinced that the value of the process of preparing good questions that fit the host language context is higher than the time apparently saved by generating questions quickly. And we do understand and appreciate their concern, and so we encourage potential users of Transcelerator to consider the following. Transcelerator does allow translators to add to, delete, and modify the existing source questions as needed. Although that's not the path of least resistance, it is possible to do that, and so we've made provision for that kind of customization. Also, the primary target users for Transcelerator are translation teams which have had difficulty writing useful questions from scratch. Teams that are successfully writing good checking questions already and getting good results from their checking process, we don't think they should switch to Transcelerator just to make their lives easier. Also, there's still very much a need for consultants, translation facilitators, and translation team members to be alert for comprehension issues that are not adequately addressed by the canned questions in Transcelerator. So please work closely with your consultants and advisors to determine if or how Transcelerator can improve your translation. Finally, I'd say that while some customization is almost certainly going to improve the checking process, it's not completely clear whether the maximum quality can be achieved by most teams writing questions completely from scratch. Obviously, some of the built-in questions in Transcelerator could benefit from a careful review and rewrite, but there are a lot of pretty good solid questions there that seem pretty likely to be useful for checking the comprehensibility of a translation in pretty much any language. So perhaps the ideal would be for a team to read through the list of canned questions, and then before translating any of them, and without referring back to that list, work through the section they're trying to check, write out some questions from scratch, and then go back and use their list to supplement the canned list in Transcelerator. Let's talk a little bit about the future of Transcelerator. Since our initial release, we've had some requests from field users to have the user interface and the canned questions translated into French. Some initial work has already been done to prepare Transcelerator for localization, and there is a proposal before the Software Prioritization Committee to evaluate the merits of this. If localization of Transcelerator into French or some other language of wider communication is of interest to you, please contact me, or better yet, your area representative, to make your needs known. Obviously, because of the thousands of questions that would need to be translated, this will require a significant commitment of time, but happily, Transcelerator itself can be used to speed up this process. Some of the other possible future enhancements to Transcelerator might include customizing questions easier, improving the built-in questions to improve consistency, and especially in the case of the Old Testament, to increase coverage, as well as various usability improvements, such as making it easier to confirm guest translations more quickly. Finally, the hope is that one day the output from Transcelerator might be able to feed into another program that would be able to conduct comprehension checking using crowdsourcing strategies online or using mobile phones. One possible channel might be to feed into ScriptureForge. So far, Transcelerator does not include integrated help. If you need help, I'd recommend you start by checking the wiki and see if the information you need is there. It's also there online where you'll be able to find the download link to download Transcelerator if you'd like to check it out. If you still have questions or need to interact further about anything, feel free to send email to transcelerator_feedback@sil.org. If you have questions that I can help you with, I'd be happy to do that. If you have suggestions for improvement or would like to vote on suggestions made by others to guide decision makers concerning the future direction of the development of Transcelerator, please visit the user voice website listed there on the screen. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoy using Transcelerator, and I look forward to interacting with you in the future.